Hello, my name is Stephanie Ferri, and this is my issue debate presentation for KIN 77A, Issues in Kinesiology. I will be discussing issues with grading and assessment in physical education with a specific focus on the topic of using a pass-fail grading system. My introductory scenario is Ms. Benjamin sits down to enter her students' final grades for the quarter. Her students had just completed a volleyball unit where both traditional and alternative assessments were used. This year, in an effort to make student evaluations match her learning targets, Ms. Benjamin focused assessments on performance, mastery, and improvement. Students were assessed on skills such as bumping, setting, and serving, cooperation, and rules of the game. Within those categories, students received scores for the percent they improved and the percent they were able to master the skills. And assessments were given at the beginning and the end of the unit. Molly was a student in Miss Benjamin's class. She showed up every day dressed out with a positive attitude and always tried her best. Molly had never played volleyball before because her last school did not have a PE program. Throughout the quarter, Molly worked diligently to improve her skills. She focused during class, asked for feedback and applied it, and sometimes even practiced independently during lunch and after school. By the end of the quarter, Molly showed high percentages in progress in all areas of skill, cooperation, and rules of the game. However, her percent mastery scores were still very low. While Molly had made excellent progress, she still lacked many of the skill components needed for mastery. By the end of the quarter, her grade averaged out to be an 81, which is a B-. This scenario introduces my area for debate and brings up the following questions. Does the use of a traditional grading system communicate the learning profile for Molly? Would a pass-fail grading system be a more authentic way to communicate standards and achievement? Assessment provides feedback to the learner, reports student progress, and can help shape instruction. The area of assessment is relevant for many people in kinesiology. Physical education teachers, coaches, trainers, and administrators should all be measuring and assessing performance and progress of their athletes or their clients or their students, as well as providing them feedback and making adjustments to their programs based on those evaluations. Physical education teachers in particular, assessment is necessary to help ensure quality physical education programs, provide feedback for teaching concerning student performance and the effectiveness of their programs. They provide program justification and contribute to the accountability of the profession. Programs that do not assess will have no proof of what students actually learn. Programs like these fail to provide teachers with knowledge about their teaching or the effectiveness of their programs. We want to keep in mind that the primary purpose of assessment and grading is to measure student achievement of the established learning objectives. Now I'd like to bring about some of the issues that physical educators face with assessment and grading. And the use of grades for all learning has been a subject of debate for a while now. There's a disconnect between assessment and grading in physical education. We want to make note that not everything that we see and assess can be quantified. And what we can quantify easily, such as written exams or quizzes, we don't have to grade. So in a traditional grading system, teachers are expected to explain to the student what it's required for a specific grade. For example, what does it take to earn an A in a class? However, when we look at learning criteria and standards in physical education and performance criteria, qualitative movement requirements can be difficult for teachers to evaluate and grade on. There's also a concern that grading performance can be unfair. Students may have unequal possibilities to develop and practice and display knowledge requirements or skill requirements due to socioeconomic factors, group dynamics, or previous movement experience, like in our case with Molly. She wasn't part of a PE program at her last school. Occasionally, teachers may compensate for student differences by adopting class requirements and expectations to make it possible for each student to achieve. And we're going to look at that more in the next coming slides. So we're going to look at what do we assess and what do we grade. Opinions regarding how physical education students should be assessed can vary greatly within our profession. As a consequence, some physical education professionals encourage skills-driven measures of competency, while others believe that attributes such as attitude, effort, and participation are equally or even more important to assess. Attribute-driven assessment, such as grading on effort or participation, is something I'd like to talk about first. Grading on behavior, motivation, and attitude, for example, can help balance out performance grades. In our example of Molly, this would mean, or would have meant, despite her performance and her level of mastery, her teacher would recognize that she put forth exemplary effort and she would have earned a higher grade than a B-. However, when using an attribute-driven assessment, teachers need to be careful about fairness, reliability, and validity of assessments and tests. In addition, grading on these factors may reinforce perceptions that physical education has no educational value. It potentially could show up that we're emphasizing showing up as merely good enough, and that there is lack of emphasis on achievement of standards. There is research to support that the bulk of grading and assessment should be based on achievement of meaningful educational objectives and not on effort, attendance, dressing out, participation, attitude, or any combination of these. So this brings up the idea of skills-driven assessment. Within skills-driven assessment comes standard-based assessments, criterion-based, and achievement-based grading and assessment. In these areas, generally, we're using physical education standards, either set by our district or potentially our state, for example, and we're looking for student achievement of these standards. With criterion-based, we're comparing students to a set criteria and not comparing them to one another's performance. However, this still leaves the question, what do we grade? We don't need to grade everything we assess, but how do we as teachers determine what to assess and then what to grade? Some teachers don't have to think about this too much. They only see their students once or twice a week, and in that time, they are forced to grade whatever they can and have time to assess. Other teachers, however, who see their students maybe on a daily basis, have more options to grade certain assessments. In a standard-based grading system, teachers need to think about which assessment tools to use. For example, do they want to use structured observation, written test, logs, journals, skits, research and reports, or projects? When grading those standards, they need to ask the question, are all standards created equal? What beliefs does that teacher have in the importance of a standard, and how does that factor into the weight it carries in the gradebook? How does a teacher calculate a final grade that is appropriate and represents an individual's wide range of abilities for all 6 different standards? And then, how do we use alternate forms of assessment, such as journals, skits, and observations, and translate those to a score for grading? In other words, when devising a unit grade, or any type of grade for physical education, one of the main issues is deciding first what to assess. And that still leaves the issue of when and how often we grade. Do we grade by unit, by quarter, by standard? And what weight does certain standards carry in that grade book? What determines a final grade? Are we looking at criteria? So there's a lot to think about when we talk about assessment, and then a whole other step that we need to think about in terms of translating assessments into grades. What I'm proposing is a pass-fail grading system. And the pass-fail grading system is an alternate to a traditional grading system that uses letter grades A through F. And it offers a practical approach to physical education. What a pass-fail grading system is meant to represent is a move towards criterion reference standards, where standards are made explicit to students and are adhered to, and that's how grades are reported. I'd like to talk about the pros and cons of using a pass-fail grading system. The positives. The pass-fail grading system improves intrinsic motivation and has positive effects on well-being. Students in a pass-fail grading system do not rely on achievement of a good grade to motivate them to learn. So in a study by Wilkinson, he found that when looking at medical students who were enrolled in a pass-fail grading system, they were motivated more intrinsically because there was no letter grade that was giving them extrinsic motivation. From that study, they found that they were actually able to sort of flush out students, and they saw this as a positive, who were solely extrinsically driven by the letter grade. The second thing that came from the Wilkinson's research was that the pass-fail system increased desire to collaborate, and it decreased competition within the cohort of students, and also there was an increase in student well-being. Some other findings from the study was the benefit on the welfare of the students, and they found that there was no adverse effect on achievement. In addition, a pass-fail grading system can reduce tension and stress, and also it can encourage risk-taking. So work by Dellery and McLaughlin revealed support for the pass-fail grading system because it encouraged more risk-taking and the reduction of tension and stress. The study took place at Virginia Polytech, where students were able to choose a pass-fail option for their classes. The study supports that students were more likely to take courses outside of their field of study to gain additional knowledge without the fear of lowering their grade point average. In addition, supporters of the pass-fail grading system argued that the system improved students' psychological well-being, it decreased competitiveness, and promoted cooperative learning, which are some similar themes that we see in the Wilkinson study. Students who took classes with the pass-fail option reported reduced tension and increased self-motivation. On the other side, looking at some of the cons of the pass-fail grading system, studies support that the pass-fail system dumbs down education for our students. Others believe that grading procedures lower motivation. Students see a pass-fail option as an easy way out. There's a negative idea that there is no opportunity for students to improve their grade point average. And also there was research to show that while there was no decrease in achievement in the study with Dellery and McLaughlin, it potentially had negative effects on their entry into postgraduate programs or into medical internships. Some feel that the pass-fail grading system promotes mediocrity in the learning process, and there were studies to support a decline in class attendance and a decline in academic performance and effort when the pass-fail grading system was used. So we're going to look at the pass-fail option for physical education. And first I want to revisit some of the questions we asked at the beginning of the presentation. So, does the B- Molly earned communicate her learning? And I'm saying no, it does not. Is Molly's achievement quantifiable? And no, not all aspects are. Maybe some of the written factors or scores on tests and quizzes would be able to be translated into a grade, but most aspects are not quantifiable. What are the implications of earning a B- on her motivation to being physically active? I'm going to relate this idea back to motivation and that the pass-fail grading system can support intrinsic motivation. A student earning a B- in your class who is working really hard to improve and who has shown improvement, when they earn low marks, there's a potential that their attitudes could change negatively towards physical activity. And lastly, would a pass-fail grading system be a better option for reporting grades in PE? And the answer is yes. We're going to talk about that next. So why the pass-fail option for physical education? One of the most important factors is that there are no large-scale modifications or radical changes to curriculum that need to happen to implement the pass-fail system. It doesn't take large sums of money. This system can be implemented relatively easily with what's going on currently at your school. The grading system introduces more flexibility into PE programs. Teachers can individualize assessment pieces and scoring and to the needs of students because they're not locked into having to report the grades in one certain way, like with a letter grade. The pass-fail grading system will eliminate inequities that are inherent in any grading system, and it does not require that students' actions and performance be quantified and ranked into 5 letters. It's also going to encourage students to engage in activities in which they otherwise might not choose to participate in. This goes back to the risk-taking piece. And this is also really great for students who may already be highly skilled in a certain area. They may be encouraged to fail, to try something different, try a different technique, because they're not worried about their performance affecting their grade. Also, with lower skilled students, they may be more likely to try hard and fail because there's less of a risk. Again, we're eliminating the grade and the idea that it will be factored into a grade point average, and students are going to be more open to trying new things. There's going to be a reduction in fears of low grades and anxiety towards that, to not be good enough. It will also help eliminate competition, unhealthy competition between students. In general, many schools and universities are moving towards the pass-fail option, and so physical education really needs to follow that lead, and we need to examine why this is a good option for us. We also need to remember that most learning is driven by assessment, will be influenced far more by what is assessed and how it is assessed and where the standards are set than by how it's reported. So the first step is really designing standards-based assessments that focus on student learning. And then we need to look at reporting, and the reporting needs to follow that model. It needs to report the criteria and the student progress and mastery. And traditional letter grades simply do not do that. But a pass-fail system goes hand in hand with criteria and really gives us an option to report scores the way we want to. In addition, with flexibility, the pass-fail set point and score can be determined by the teacher. There's a common misconception that to earn the score of passing, a student needs to just get a 50% or higher. That's the score that's passing. But that's simply not true. Teachers can set a pass point to the needs of their students, to their philosophies and pedagogy, and there is flexibility there. One of the reasons that the pass-fail system fits so well with PE is because learning criteria and standard-based practices are at the root of this pass-fail system. Also, eliminating extrinsic motivation can be useful in physical education as we try to support students in being independent with physical activity. So, what does this mean for our profession? Setting standards for quality assessment means that as PE teachers, we need to have standard-based practices, and our grade reporting needs to emphasize standards as well. So the pass-fail system would require the setting of lots of standards because we also need to set that score for pass-fail, and we need to make sure our assessments are set and rooted in standards. The pass-fail grading system needs to be accompanied by more standard-based assessments, and focus is going to move away from reporting on easily measurable attributes such as knowledge in test and quiz scores. And it's going to place the emphasis on assessment measures that measure more important attributes such as performance. So setting appropriate scores for achievement. Again, pass-fail scores should be set appropriately to ensure the results of the assessments are valid. Standards need to be set accurately, classifying passing and failing scores. The pass-fail system means that teachers can focus on developing assessments and they don't have to focus on thinking about what am I going to grade, what's going to translate into a grade. Teachers in general need to assess accurately and use assessments to benefit students, not merely to sort and grade. Pass-fail grading needs to clarify definitions and purposes of what we're trying to do in physical education and what learning is really going on. Implementing this system means that teachers don't need to deal with issues on deciding the basis for grading, what ingredients to use, how factors will be weighed, the degree of professional judgment, and the relative emphasis on mastery and progress. They can use this time instead to be planning lessons and designing assessments in a more authentic and meaningful way. We can shift the focus to achievement, and we can implement this system and keep good records of learning. We can be using quality assessments. We can have samples of student performance. And we're really emphasizing learning targets. Reports given in a pass-fail system can still be done to relay the content that was taught and student progress and learning targets. So in conclusion, no grading system alone is perfect. So a pass-fail grading system without standards-based assessment and without criteria and a record and report of student learning will not work, just like a letter grading system will not work. So we need to be sure that we're combining the proper elements to make an effective grading system. But we do know that the pass-fail grading system is superior to the traditional letter grading system. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned a little bit about standards-based assessment and how they fit hand in hand with the pass-fail grading system. And I hope it was useful or will be useful to you in your own profession. Thank you.